Most of us know Stacey Abrams as an American politician, lawyer, and voting rights activist who served as minority leader of the Georgia House of Representatives. But what you might not know is that she is also the #1 best-selling author of many fiction, nonfiction, and children's books. Her latest thriller, Rogue Justice, involves a black-mailed federal judge, a secret court, and a brazen murder, which may lead to an unprecedented national crisis. Her talk about writing with fellow author Laurie King was sponsored by Bookshop Santa Cruz and sold out in 24 hours.
We're going to talk about your books, fiction, mysteries, because that's why I'm here. Hi. The title of your first Avery Keene novel, While Justice Sleeps, refers in part to a Supreme Court justice who is sleeping. That is, he's in a coma. But the idea of justice, the just from the Latin, is basic to the entire mystery genre, partly in the sense of lawful, but also in the sense, and perhaps even more important, in the sense of fair and right. So talk a little bit about how Avery Keene wrestles with the difference between lawful and right.
So there's a scene in While Justice Sleeps when Howard Wynn, the justice who is in the coma, asks her what her loyalty is to. Is she loyal to him? Is she loyal to the court? And she says she's loyal to the court. She's loyal to what's right. And sometimes we conflate the people we respect with the work we're supposed to do. We take our sense of responsibility and we assume that it is more protean than it is. It can be adapted. And for Avery, what is right may not always be what is on the paper as legal, but she is very careful that if she's going to skirt the line, she's never going to cross it. And part of the architecture of her character is that I wanted someone who had responsibility but no authority. When you have authority, you can make the law a little bit of what you want it to be. When you've got responsibility, though, you have to be more careful about that distinction between what is lawful and what is right.
Have things changed at all?
Well, in 2010, writing about a narcissistic, moralistic president who was engaged in international intrigue seemed far-fetched. There's no way that could happen, and no one cared about the Supreme Court. It was this dead institution who could care less. And so, they told me over and over again, no one's going to read this. And then 2019 happened. So when I brought it back out, people were like, wait, you wrote about a president who, may have skirted the law and tried to, interfere in foreign affairs. And I'm like, it's not about him. It's really not. In fact, I intentionally draw Brandon Stokes, the president. He's smart. He's a war hero. He is. That came out all kinds of wrong. My point is, he's y'all trying to get me in trouble. And I think it's coming from the president of the NAACP.
These are your people here, Stacey.
I know. So the whole point was that it's easy to caricature what has happened. We focus so much on who is doing it that we forget what's being done. And part of what I want to be careful of with this character is that I don't want us to be able to dismiss his bad actions because of his bad character. We have allowed the sort of bombast and sleight of hand of a certain president to blind us to the fact that he's got a lot of imitators out there.
Right. Yeah.
And they're running a lot of states. Yep. Some of them are almost as orange as he is. And that the reality is that it's the behavior that we should be concerned about. It's the actions, not the vessel, but the delivery. And that's one of the reasons I want Brandon Stokes to be seen as he is very much a character who existed before 2016. He did not come down a golden escalator.
The metaphor language in the one episode of with Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, the alien who speaks in terms of a story, that is short for an entire depth of meaning, and I think that by its nature, the mystery genre does that. I did do a presentation recently on 5 things that I had learned about the mystery genre and what it is that makes it strong. And one of those things I found was that it is subversive, that the mystery genre is ideally formulated for sneaking in ideas to a story, that you're telling an entertainment, but I mean, you're talking about death and world destruction and all the rest. So you can fit in some weighty issues in there. When you are writing a novel, as opposed to any of the other things that you fill the corners of your life with, are you aware of your novels being a tool in the toolbox of what you're doing, a way to get people to think and hopefully act about issues?
Oh, absolutely. So my mom was a research librarian when I was growing up, and my parents were activists. They protested and did things to help make the world a better place. My dad was arrested when he was 14 for registering Black people to vote in Mississippi. So I grew up with a very strong ethic of what should be done. When I started writing, I don't remember not writing, but when I started publishing, so I was in law school, and my first novel is based on my ex-boyfriend's dissertation. He's a chemical physicist. He discovered this chemical called he discovered properties of microzeolites. Okay, this all sounds really boring, but when I read it, the whole point was that it was a chemical that could absorb other chemicals without reacting. And he used it to figure out how to light computer screens or something like that. Anyway, we were talking about it, and I said, what if you could clean the environment of developing nations that are being forced through the industrialization stage, and they're facing air pollution, and what if these microzeolites could be deployed, and then what if that technology could be misappropriated for chemical weapons because of how chemical weapons have a limited range. And so I'm describing all this to him with great excitement in my voice. And he's like, it can't do any of that, Stacey. I'm like, this is why we broke up. You have no imagination. But for me, my very first novel was a conversation about environmental justice, about how you deal with the necessity of environmental action at a time and in a place when industrialization is not where it is for us. This is back in 99, 2000. I've written about ethnobotany. I did some early AI stuff long before ChatGPT was a thing. I've written about forensic anthropology. I write about things I'm curious about, but also things I want folks to know about. Just like, even if you never thought you cared about this topic, I'm going to give you just enough that when you finish, you feel like, I could have a dinner conversation about this. Not a long dinner, but I could at least make it through the appetizers and the first course. And so in each of my books, I try to tackle topics that I'm interested in. I want to know enough, and I was saying this to Laurie, I want to know enough that, if you are a layperson, you're really impressed, and if you are an expert, you're not offended. And that in between, you've learned something, you're grappling with questions you hadn't really thought of. I mean, like, raise your hand if you spend a lot of time thinking about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Okay, Brooks notwithstanding. And I don't know what you do for a living, sir, but I'm very sorry. For the rest of us, we don't think about this secret court that governs much of our national security. I like stories that move you through and you take stuff with you as you get through them, but I'm very intentional about how I craft a story. Like, I want you, if you put the book down, I want you to know you got to come back and pick it up. Like, you've all put down books and you come back 2 years later, you're like, oh, I was reading that? Like, I don't ever want you to be able to do that. And so I craft it so that the the architecture I use is I create a problem, I complicate the problem, and in each chapter, in solving a problem, I create a new problem. So that every time you're like, okay, I
noticed that.
Exactly. It's because you want to drive the narrative, you want to drive the speed, and with things that are so weighty, you can't let the weight of the topic slow the pace of the book, because then you're reading an encyclopedia, not a novel.
Right.
And so I try to strike that balance.